So, what were some of the absolute best second and third season episodes from that classic 1960s sci-fi fantasy TV show Lost in Space? Let's find out. Movies,
Music and monsters. Danger.
Hey my friends, Dan Monroe here, talking about movies, music, and monsters. Lost in Space, the second and third season, certainly extremely different from what we saw in the first season, that's for sure, and for some very good reasons that we'll dig into in just a minute. I already did a video on what were, in my opinion, the very best episodes of season 1, so if you haven't seen that, check it out. Link in the description. And you know, I sometimes feel as if because of the radical change that was made for seasons 2 and 3 of Lost in Space, that people often disregard those seasons as being too campy, too silly, and just too ridiculously far out to enjoy. But trust me, there were some excellent shows during those years. So grab your space pod with your favorite multicolored space alien and a bucket of stale popcorn, and let's dive in. The answer is really quite simple. Any show with me in it was the best show. Okay, right off the bat, I have to honestly admit that I never was and still am not really an enormous fan of Lost in Space's second season. The reason for that is because I loved the first season so much, especially the early ones. Such great outer space adventures with the Robinson family, the robot, which actually acted like a real robot back in those days, and the nefarious Dr. Smith, who rather rapidly changed into almost a completely different character, again, for very logical reasons. But it wasn't all that bad, and I guess it really depends on the mindset you happen to be in while watching some of these goofier Lost in Space episodes. So many people associate some of the quote-unquote worst Lost in Space episodes with Season 3, like The Promised Planet and The Great Vegetable Rebellion, and yes, they were pretty goofy, but to me, the ultimate silliness came in Season 2, when the show relaunched for its second year, this time in glorious Technicolor due to the fact that Batman was really surging in the ratings, and Irwin Allen wanted Lost in Space to more or less stay current and keep up. Now, speaking of Batman, yes, Batman was extremely campy. Yes, Batman was extremely goofy at times, but Batman was not the reason why Lost in Space got silly. Batman is not the reason why Jonathan Harris's Dr. Smith character became a complete goofball. Plain and simple, it was the time slot. Wait. What? You heard me right, the time slot. So, let me explain. Lost in Space ran from 7:30 to 8:30, which was considered at that time the family hour. The networks at the time had very strict regulations as to what exactly you could show on air during that time. And after viewing the first several episodes of Lost in Space, the first season, the network executives were, shall we say, more than a little concerned about Dr. Smith and the robot coming across too evil, too dangerous, too scary to the kids during that particular time slot. So, word came down from on high to Irwin Allen that you'd better make some changes and you'd better make them fast. Keep in mind, we're talking about studio executives here. They didn't really care whether the kids were scared. They simply didn't want to lose the sponsors. Money. Well, son of a bloop. And that, my friends, is the real reason why Lost in Space got goofy. And if you think about it, It started really pretty early in the first season. After the first 6 or 7 episodes, you can almost immediately see that goofy Dr. Smith character starting to sneak in. Not as much as seasons 2 and 3, obviously, but it was definitely there, and by the end of the first season, the Smith character was really just about as goofy and cowardly as he was for the remaining second and third color seasons. I think sometimes we don't notice it as much in season 1, maybe because it was in black and white, which gave the illusion of more of a serious tone. Smith was really goofy early on. I just don't think we noticed it as much.
I used to tell Jonathan that he was hamming it up a little too much. He never listened.
It always staggers my imagination to wonder what Lost in Space might have been during those 3 years if it ran from, say, 8:30 to 9:30 rather than 7:30 to 8:30. Might have been a completely different show, but it is what it is. Okay, on to seasons 2 and 3. Lost in Space blasted off in full color over the airwaves in the fall of 1966 with, in my opinion, a really awesome show called Blast Off into Space with Mr. Neeram, the old prospector guy, digging for cosmonium, the most valuable and precious treasure in the galaxy. I love the show because even though a lot of changes were being made when they switched over to color, they hadn't quite made all the robot color changes yet. Yeah, I know, I'm a nerd. What can I say?
I always preferred the way I looked in the first season anyway.
Me too, and I thought the story in this show was great, and the unbelievable lift-off sequence at the end of the show with the incredible practical special effects was second to none, really exciting, really super cool. I don't know why, I guess I'm weird, but this is one of those shows that when I watch it, I turn the color off, and to me, for some reason, I just enjoy the show more in black and white. It just looks better. You know, I always wondered exactly how the Robinson family stayed in suspended animation all that time in the freezing tubes. They just seemed to be sleeping so soundly. At first, I thought it was just the technology, but now, thanks to today's sponsor, I'm pretty sure it wasn't technology at all, but it was Dream by Beam. I've mentioned to you guys before that I only endorse products that I've actually tried, and this one, I gotta say, is pretty darn good. If anybody out there has any issues sleeping, and quite frankly, who doesn't, and doesn't want to ingest all the chemicals from all the sleeping pills, well, here is your healthy, natural alternative. Beam Dream is a delicious cup of healthy hot cocoa specifically designed for sleeping with a smooth, rich cocoa flavor, but it does come in a ton of other flavors like sea salt caramel, salty dark chocolate, chocolate peanut butter, which happens to be my personal favorite, and a whole bunch more. Really a very revolutionary new approach to sleep. All natural, sugar-free, gluten-free, keto-friendly, dairy-free, and only 15 calories per serving. And it's super easy to use. Simply put 1 scoop of powder into a mug of hot water or milk, blend it up, sip it down a half hour before bedtime, and bingo, you're done. Being the skeptic that I am, I wanted proof, so I actually used my fitness tracker to track my sleep before and after using Beam Dream, and yeah, I gotta say, believe it or not, my sleep did improve. But just don't take my word for it, considering that sleeping is something we literally spend 1/3 of our entire life doing. Why not get the best sleep you possibly can now with up to 35% off Dream? Just click the link in the description, shopbeam.com/Dan Monroe, and use the code Monroe at checkout, or even easier, simply scan this QR code with your phone and start getting some really proper shut-eye tonight. And now, back to Lost in Space. Wild Adventure really started off awesome to me. Gets a little goofy at the end with the green girl floating around in space, but the first half of this show is just awesome science fiction. Dr. Smith trying to find ways to reroute the astrogator to a different course. The tension between Smith and the other cast members was just so fun to watch. The Ghost Planet I liked a lot. That cool female robot trying to convince the Robinsons they've actually landed on Earth. Really pretty decent early second season show in my opinion. But the extreme campiness now begins to slowly kick in with Forbidden World, Space Circus. Not really shows I spent a lot of time watching, but then Prisoners of Space was great, where the Robinson family was put on trial for their past crimes in space, cleverly utilizes footage from earlier Lost in Space episodes. Deadly Games of Gamma 6 was always one of my favorites still to this day, other than the ridiculous boxing stuff at the end with Dr. Smith. There's a lot of good stuff to enjoy in the show. The tension between John Robinson and Maiko around the Wheel of Life at the end of the show is absolutely fantastic and super fun to watch. Now, jumping ahead a couple shows, we get a visit to Hades, where other than Judy spending the last 15 minutes of the show ridiculously and annoyingly crying nonstop, it's a really fun episode, I think. Dr. Smith thinking he's in hell and Morbus is the devil. A little goofy, but overall, I enjoyed it. Wreck of the Robot was one of my absolute favorites, and why wouldn't it be? It was all about the robot. A really spooky show with creepy characters and scary music. Aliens disabling and analyzing the robot to create a master machine to control other machines. Just an awesome show, sprinkled in between the really goofy ones like the Dream Monster, the Golden Man, the Toy Maker. But again, keep in mind, like I was saying earlier, that watching the shows really depends on the frame of mind that you're in, and I know a lot of Lost in Space fans absolutely hate to hear me say this, but I'm sorry, it's the truth. Lost in Space was made for children. It wasn't meant to draw the same audience as Star Trek or The Twilight Zone. It was made to entertain young kids, and if you watch the shows with that understanding in your mind, it doesn't necessarily make them better, but it does allow you to see how these types of shows really appealed to an 8-year-old, where they just might come across goofy to a 28-year-old. You know, on first glance, the episode The Questing Beast really comes across as insanely ridiculous with the lady dragon in the terrible costume, but beneath that, there is a really cool element to the story I like a lot, where Dr. Smith actually goes out of his way to put his own cowardly ambitions aside and actually help the family. Pretty cool. Some of, in my opinion, the very worst Lost in Space episodes ever made, still in the second season. Mutiny in Space, Rocket to Earth with Al Lewis, and probably my personal least favorite of all Lost in Space episodes. Truly unwatchable to me, The Space Vikings.
Yo-ho, yo-ho.
God help me, just stop. But then we jump right back into some really good shows like Cave of the Wizards and Treasure of the Lost Planet, which brought back Captain Tucker from the first season. Really super cool. Trip Through the Robot was pretty good, where the robot grows to an enormous size and Smith and Will get trapped inside the robot. The Phantom Family was really spooky with the duplicates of the Robinson family. So much fun to watch. Now, at this point, I really want to make it clear that other than Jonathan Harris, Billy Mooney, and Bob May, Will, Smith and the Robot, which is essentially what this entire show became in the second season, shows about these three characters pretty much week after week. The rest of the Lost in Space cast was, shall we say, understandably less than enthusiastic about the show. I mean, come on. The show started off as a sci-fi family adventure, all for one for all. Everybody had their own specific episodes. No character was intentionally ignored for the benefit of the ratings, and by this point it was really becoming quite obvious that something needed to change, and change pretty quickly. Enter season 3, where the complaints and concerns of the other cast members seems to have done a little bit of good, at least initially, with, in my opinion, one of the greatest Lost in Space episodes ever, Condemned of Space, about the prisoner ship with the frozen convicts, and of course an appearance by everybody's favorite sci-fi robot, Robbie.
Excuse me, sir. Second favorite.
Visit to a Hostile Planet was awesome. The whole family was involved. The Jupiter 2 goes through some type of space warp and ends up back on Earth finally, but in 1947, for the most part, a really good episode, even though at the end of the show, they never actually show the Robinsons getting back to their current time. I don't know whether that's just bad writing, or are we to assume that the remainder of the third season takes place in outer space in 1947? Who knows? Hunter's Moon with Megazord, a show focusing specifically on John Robinson. Finally, super great show. The ending of it with the waterfall was shot at the exact same location in Malibu Creek Park where they filmed the waterfall sequence for the original Planet of the Apes. But really good things don't seem to last forever, as we kind of very quickly slip back into the whole Smith, Robot, Will storylines with the Haunted Lighthouse, Flight into the Future, Collision of Planets, not really Lost in Space's finest moments, I can tell you that. But then we get Deadliest of the Species, awesome show about the robot falling in love with the female robot, and in the end convinced to sacrifice her to save the family.
I've never forgiven myself for that. Ever.
Robot, she was evil. She wanted to destroy the Robinsons.
She was everything to me. The way her titanium shell sparkled in the moonlight.
Good Lord. Again, dipping deep into the realm of ridiculousness, we get A Day at the Zoo, 2 weeks in space, and probably, in my opinion, the second worst Lost in Space episode ever made, Castles in Space. But then, bang, all of a sudden, we get the fricking Antimatter Man. Absolutely classic episode about the antimatter world with the antimatter John and Don and even the antimatter robot, which was coincidentally the stunt robot, simply repainted black and white with a green light bulb in the mouth. An absolutely classic Lost in Space episode that remains an extreme fan favorite right to this day. Another classic, The Time Merchant. Yeah, a little silly on the outside, but such a super cool story, sending Smith and the robot back to the day of the launch, followed by Will to try to convince the robot to get Smith on the ship or everyone will be destroyed. Classic Lost in Space, just awesome. Then once again delving into the lower pits of the Lost in Space pile with Space Beauty, Princess of Space, and God help me, The Promised Planet.
It's freaky, man. Really freaky. We're going to all freak out together.
One more word out of you, my mechanical friend, and your computers will suffer a concussion.
Oh, the pain.
And finally ending the third season with the great Vegetable Rebellion and Junkyard in Space. Yeah, I know, the Great Vegetable Rebellion gets so much flack, but if I had to personally choose between the Great Vegetable Rebellion and Space Vikings, I'll take my talking carrots all freaking day long.
Moisture. I need moisture.
I really liked Junkyard in Space, I really did. The scene at the end with Will saying goodbye to the robot is touching, albeit slightly cheesy that he was protected from the flames by love, but whatever, it's a good message. The Junkman character was super cool, and for all you Planet of the Apes fans out there, check this out. If you look real close during one scene where they're walking through the junkyard, they pass the upper torch section of the full-size Statue of Liberty torch from the original ending of Planet of the Apes. Well, there you go, my personal favorite episodes of Lost in Space Season 2 and 3. Keep in mind, these are just my favorites, just my opinion, but more importantly, what were yours? Did you guys fancy antimatter monsters or outer space cavemen?
Let us know in the comments below.
Lost in Space has been around for 60 freaking years, and one of the highlights is a brand new 60th anniversary product by Ron Gross, an amazing book called Lost in Space and Other Fantasy Worlds, the Irwin Allen art of Ron Gross, which I was honored to do one of the forewords for. This amazing book is finally now available through Amazon, so check it out and grab yourself a copy along with Ron's entire trilogy of books. Links in the description. Some other super cool Lost in Space stuff currently available. Check out these amazing handmade 24-inch quilts. Would certainly look great hung over a chair or suspended on a wall. If anyone is interested, contact Chris Krieg through his Facebook page. Link in the description. I really hope you guys enjoyed that deep dive into seasons 2 and 3 of Lost in Space, and if you did and you like this kind of stuff, please consider subscribing to the channel. I've got a whole bunch of new videos coming up really soon that I know you guys are just gonna dig. And please feel free to stop back anytime as we together continue the conversation on movies, music, and monsters.
Movies, music, and monsters.